There is a sound the universe fears more than a screaming war cry. It is not the roar of a supernova, nor the grinding of tectonic plates, nor the shriek of a fleet warping into existence. The sound the universe truly fears is the profound, absolute, and deliberate silence of a species that has decided it has had enough. It is the sound of tools being sharpened in the dark, the sound of plans being drawn on maps that no enemy will ever see. It is the sound of a billion hearts beating with a single, cold resolve. This is the story of that silence, a silence that echoed across the void, a silence mistaken for the whimper of surrender. It was, in truth, the deep, steady breath a predator takes right before it strikes. This is the story of the silence before Earth's counterattack was mistaken for surrender. The invaders called themselves the Glycon Hegemony. They were titans of chrome and biological purity, a species that had methodically pruned their own evolution, cutting away what they deemed weak: empathy, individuality, chaos. Their society was a single, monolithic consciousness. Their fleets moved with the flawless grace of a predator, and their logic was as cold and unyielding as deep space. They saw the universe not as a cradle of life, but as a garden to be weeded, and humanity was the most garish and offensive weed they had ever encountered. From their orbital platforms, they studied us. Their initial reports, broadcast with smug certainty across their psionic networks, painted a damning picture. They saw a species at war with itself, a cacophony of competing governments, ideologies, and cultures. They saw our art and called it madness. They saw our emotions and called it a design flaw. They saw our global communication network, a chaotic storm of trivia, arguments, and fleeting passions, and deemed it the nervous system of an infantile race. Humanity was, in their unassailable logic, a failed experiment, loud, inefficient, and hopelessly divided. They concluded with the finality of a death sentence that a decapitation strike would not just cripple us, it would shatter our fragile psyche entirely. Take away our noise, they reasoned, and we would have nothing left. The attack was as beautiful as it was horrifying. Lances of pure energy, fired from ships that glinted like obsidian knives, speared every major communications satellite in orbit. Groundside synchronized strikes vaporized data hubs, broadcast towers, and internet exchange points. The assault was not aimed at population centers. It was more insidious. It was an attack on connection itself. Within a single hour, the global conversation that had defined humanity for a century went dead. The endless stream of data, news, and entertainment ceased. The world fell silent. From the bridge of his flagship, the unassailable truth, Grand Arbiter Lyxos watched the data feeds from his planetary infiltration teams. The psionic chatter of humanity, a grating, chaotic noise to his refined senses, had collapsed into localized pockets of fear and confusion, just as he predicted. He allowed a flicker of what, in a lesser species, might be called satisfaction. The loud little apes were broken. Their primary strength, their ability to swarm and chatter and coordinate over vast distances, was gone. Now they were just isolated tribes, blind and deaf, ripe for harvest. The Glycon occupation began. They didn't need to level cities. They established orbital supremacy, set up resource extraction points in remote locations, and let the silence do their work for them. Their doctrine was clear. A species this reliant on constant communication would tear itself apart. Without their leaders to guide them, without their news to inform them, without their endless distractions to pacify them, they would descend into barbarism. They would starve. They would riot. They would surrender peace by agonizing peace. And for a while it seemed they were right. The first few weeks were chaos. Panic flared, but then something unexpected happened. The riot sputtered out. The panic subsided, replaced by a grim, sullen quiet. The Glycon observers, monitoring from on high, reported this new phase with clinical detachment. The subject species has entered the terminal stage of societal collapse, one report read. Active resistance has ceased. They are now in a state of passive compliance. The silence is the sound of their spirit breaking. They mistook the quiet for peace. They mistook the lack of organized opposition for acceptance. They saw humans queuing for rationed food, not with despair, but with a stony, unreadable look in their eyes, and they called it submission. The Glycon Hegemony, conquerors of 100 systems, made the single most profound and fatal error in their long history. They assumed human silence meant the same thing as Glycon silence. For the Glycons, silence was the absence of life, the void. They could not comprehend that for humanity, silence was a canvas. It was the moment the noise stopped and the real work could finally begin. The hegemony grew comfortable. They reallocated 2/3 of their fleet to the next system on their cleansing list, leaving only a skeletal occupation force. Earth was a problem solved, a footnote in their glorious history. They posted videos to their internal networks, condescending anthropological studies of the broken monkeys, showing them huddled around fires, communicating in hushed tones. They laughed at the primitive sight. They had no idea that those fires were forges. And they were not huddling for warmth, they were planning. What the Glycons interpreted as the end of civilization was, in fact, its rebirth in its most primal, most dangerous form. They had cut the head off the snake, but they didn't know they were dealing with a hydra, and every severed neck was growing back, armed with teeth. In the silence, humanity found its focus. Without the endless distraction, the mind became a weapon. Without the global network, communities became fortresses. They thought they had blinded us, but they had only forced us to open eyes we had forgotten we had. In a hidden bunker beneath the ruins of the Arecibo Observatory, a team of astronomers who had once searched for alien life were now using their knowledge to track the Glycon fleet. They couldn't transmit their findings globally, but they could use low-tech, line-of-sight laser bursts to send data packets to the next mountain range, where another team would relay it. A chain of light whispering secrets across continents. In a former automotive factory in Detroit, engineers and mechanics who once built cars were now looking at down Glycon drone schematics, reverse engineering their power sources. They didn't have the materials to replicate the alien technology, but they didn't need to. They just needed to understand its weaknesses. They discovered the drones operated on a specific harmonic frequency, a frequency that could be disrupted. They started building crude, powerful electromagnetic pulse emitters from scrap metal and microwave ovens. They were ugly, brutalist things, but they were a testament to human ingenuity. They were the tools of an insurgency. In the vast, sparsely populated Australian outback, ranchers and farmers were using their deep knowledge of the land to create traps. Not for animals, but for the Glycon ground patrols. They dug pits, rigged explosives, and used their old, battered rifles for something more than shooting kangaroos. They became ghosts, striking and fading back into the red dust, communicating not with radios, but with smoke signals and mirrors, ancient techniques given new, deadly purpose. And in every town and city, a quiet, terrifying unity emerged. The old divisions of politics, race, and religion melted away in the face of a common existential threat. There was only one tribe now, human. The plan wasn't spoken, it didn't need to be. It was instinctual, coded into our DNA from millennia of surviving ice ages, famines, and floods. Isolate, adapt, endure, and when the time is right, strike back. The Glycons saw none of this. Their patrols would report isolated pockets of primitive tool-making or unusual seismic activity, but these were dismissed as the last death throes of a dying culture. They were so blinded by their own perceived superiority, that they could not conceive of a coherent, planetary-scale resistance movement operating without a central command. They couldn't imagine a plan that grew organically, like a fungus in the dark, connecting everything without a single, visible nerve center. The date was chosen not by a general, but by an astronomer. It was the day of a predicted solar flare, a massive one that would temporarily blind the Glycon's sensitive orbital sensors. The time was synchronized across the globe not by a radio signal, but by the stars themselves. When a specific constellation reached a specific point in the sky, the silence would end. The silence wasn't surrender, it was a countdown. Grand Arbiter Lyxos was bored. His tour of duty on this conquered mudball was a stain on his otherwise stellar record. He was reviewing resource extraction yields when the first alert chimed. It was minor, a sensor blackout in the Pacific sector. He dismissed it. Solar interference, just as their science teams had predicted. Annoying but insignificant. Then another alert, and another. A dozen, 100, entire continents were going dark on his sensory map. It wasn't the clean, surgical blackout of their initial attack. This was messy, chaotic. It was like a rash spreading across the planet. He felt a prickle of something his species had long since engineered out of themselves. A primitive, cold emotion. He didn't have a name for it, but humans would have called it dread. In Detroit, the moment the constellation aligned, 1,000 EMP devices, hidden in cars, sewers, and basements, were activated. A wave of raw electromagnetic energy washed over the city. Every Glycon drone within a 10-mile radius fell from the sky like swatted flies, their systems fried. Humans poured from the buildings, not with guns, but with salvaged metal pipes and wrenches, swarming the downed, helpless machines and tearing them apart for salvageable components. In the Australian outback, the ranchers triggered their traps. A Glycon patrol craft, skimming low over the plains, was suddenly caught in a massive, pre-positioned net made of high-tensile steel cable, salvaged from an old mining operation. The craft smashed into the ground, and before the dazed survivors could react, they were surrounded by grim-faced men and women on horseback, their old rifles proving surprisingly effective against the gaps in Glycon armor. In the North Atlantic, the plan was even more audacious. For weeks, deep-sea welders had been working on the wrecks of old, decommissioned nuclear submarines. They weren't trying to get the reactors online. They were packing the hulls with conventional explosives, turning them into massive guided torpedoes. Using the cover of the solar flare, small fishing trawlers towed these behemoths into the paths of the Glycon orbital patrol routes. Not the warships, but the smaller, unshielded supply ships. As the first Glycon freighter descended to resupply a ground base, a remote signal detonated 100,000 tons of TNT directly beneath it. The freighter vanished in a flash of light that was, for a moment, brighter than the sun. The most brutal blow came from the sky itself. Humanity had always been fascinated by asteroids. We tracked them meticulously. The team in the Arecibo ruins hadn't just been tracking the Glycon fleet. They had been calculating a new, terrible equation. Using their network of laser relays, they had sent precise trajectory data to a dozen different hidden launch sites around the world, repurposed spaceports, remote mountain bases, even a fortified oil rig. They used salvaged rocket engines and industrial thrusters, strapping them to small, near-Earth asteroids, turning them into crude but terrifyingly effective kinetic weapons. The Glycons were looking for energy signatures, for warp drives, for weaponized radiation. They never thought to look for a silent, cold rock falling from the sky. They didn't see it coming until it was too late. The first asteroid, no bigger than a house, struck the primary Glycon command and control center in what was once the Gobi Desert. It didn't explode. It simply hit. The impact carved a mile-wide crater where the base had been, the shockwave flattening everything for 50 miles in every direction. There were no survivors. There was nothing left to survive in. Then came the second, and the third. A dozen falling stars, each one aimed not with the precision of a laser, but with the brutal, undeniable certainty of gravity. They didn't target cities, they targeted Glycon infrastructure. Their landing zones, their extraction sites, their shield generators. On the bridge of the unassailable truth, Grand Arbiter Lyxos stared at his tactical display, which was now a mass of screaming red alerts and static. He couldn't understand what he was seeing. This wasn't a war. It was a planetary spasm of pure, unadulterated violence. It was uncoordinated, yet perfectly synchronized. It was primitive, yet impossibly effective. They were being attacked with rocks and farm equipment and repurposed junk, and they were losing. He tried to issue orders to call for reinforcements, but his communications were being jammed. Not by some sophisticated alien technology, but by sheer noise. The humans, having jury-rigged their old broadcast towers, were blasting every frequency with everything they had: rock music, political speeches, static whale songs, recordings of babies crying. The cacophony they had once derided as a weakness was now being used as a weapon. A wave of pure chaos that overwhelmed their ordered, logical systems. The silence was broken. It was replaced by the roar of explosions, the shriek of dying alien machinery, and the triumphant, defiant shouts of a species that had been pushed too far. The humans were not fighting to reclaim their planet. Not yet. They were fighting to send a message written in fire and steel. It said, "You made a mistake. You thought we were broken because we were quiet. But our silence was not the silence of the tomb. It was the silence of the forge." The counterattack lasted for 17 hours. It was a whirlwind of asymmetrical warfare. The Glycons, with their superior technology and rigid tactics, were prepared for a conventional battle. They were not prepared for an enemy that used its own planet as a weapon, an enemy that fought with the desperate, unpredictable fury of a cornered animal. They were used to opponents who surrendered when their command structure was broken. They had no frame of reference for a species that became a billion generals the moment their leaders were taken away. When the solar flare subsided and the dust began to settle, the Glycon occupation force was shattered. More than half their ground forces were dead or captured. Their orbital support network was in ruins. Their command structure was decapitated, this time for real. The surviving Glycon ships fled, limping back toward deep space, broadcasting panicked, incoherent warnings to the approaching reinforcement fleet. Warnings that spoke of a planet of monsters, of primitives who used logic and chaos as two blades of the same sword. On Earth, the noise died down again, but this was a different kind of quiet. It was not the fearful silence of the occupied, nor the grim silence of the planners. It was the calm, exhausted silence of a victor surveying the battlefield. They had not won the war, but they had won the right to fight it on their own terms. They had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not in its technology or its unity, but in its stubborn, indomitable, and chaotic spirit. They proved that when you strip everything away from a human being, what you're left with is not a victim. You're left with a survivor. And there is nothing in the universe more dangerous than a survivor with a score to settle. The Glycon Hegemony made a mistake they would never repeat, a lesson learned in blood and ruin. They mistook a deliberate, focused silence for the weakness of surrender. They now understood the brutal truth. When your enemy, an enemy known for its noise, its chaos, and its passion, suddenly goes quiet, you should not celebrate, you should be terrified, because that silence is not an ending. It is the deep breath before the roar. This story, this testament to humanity's spirit, is not just some fiction from the stars. It is a brutal, honest mirror reflecting a fundamental law of power, of strength, and of personal victory. How many times have you been underestimated? How many times has your own quiet been mistaken for weakness, your introspection for defeat? The world, like the Glycons, celebrates the loud. It rewards the brash, the boastful, the ones who broadcast their every intention. It is conditioned to see silence as a vacuum, an absence of progress, a sign of surrender. And in that, it makes a profound and exploitable error. Let them make that errors. Your moments of silence are not your moments of weakness. They are your moments of forging. When you retreat from the noise of the world, from the endless chatter of social media, from the demands and opinions of others, you are not surrendering. You are entering your workshop. You are sharpening your mind. You are studying the battlefield of your own life, identifying the weaknesses in your own enemy. Be it a bad habit, a crippling doubt, a professional rival, or a monumental goal that seems impossible. The world wants you to broadcast your every move. It wants you to announce your diet on day one. It wants you to post about the business you're going to start. This is a trap. It bleeds your energy, dissipates your focus, and invites judgment and doubt before you've even taken the first real step. It makes you accountable to the opinions of others, not to the results themselves. Embrace the power of the human method. Go silent. Let them think you've given up. Let them think you've accepted your lot, that you've been defeated by your circumstances. Let them grow comfortable in their assumptions. While they are celebrating your imagined surrender, you will be working. You will be learning. You will be building. You will be reverse engineering your problems, finding their harmonic frequencies, their critical weaknesses. You will be laying traps of competence and preparation. Every hour you spend studying when no one is watching is a weapon being forged. Every workout you complete in the quiet of the early morning is armor being hardened. Every dollar you save, every skill you acquire, every page you read while they are distracted by noise, that is you, aiming a kinetic weapon from the darkness. You are not building a conventional army. You are preparing for an asymmetrical counteroffensive against your own limitations. Your counterattack will not be announced. It will not be preceded by a warning. It will simply happen. It will be the day you launch the business they thought you de-abandoned. It will be the day you reveal a physique forged in discipline while they were sleeping. It will be the day you solve the problem that everyone else had given up on. It will be a sudden, shocking display of competence that leaves the doubters and the naysayers in stunned silence. They will not understand how you did it. They will call it luck. They will call it a fluke, but you will know the truth. You will know it was born in the quiet. It was planned in the dark. It was the inevitable result of a silence they tragically, fatally mistook for surrender. So the next time you feel the need to retreat, to pull back from the world and work on yourself, do not see it as a failure. See it for what it is, a declaration of war. You are going silent because you have decided to stop talking about the person you want to be and start building that person in the dark. You are cutting communications with your own weakness. You are ceasing all negotiations with mediocrity. Let the world have its noise. Let others have their fleeting moments of broadcasted glory. Your path is different. It is the path of the quiet professional, the silent warrior. Your victory will not be loud, but it will be total. It will not be a plea for recognition, but a statement of fact, written in the language of results. Take a deep breath. Let the silence settle. Your counterattack is coming, and they will never see it coming.